Owner has no idea why sandwiches never reach customers. Goes undercover and discovers who took them. The first call came at 11:47 a.m., and Mark wiped flour from his hands and grabbed the phone wedged between the cash register and a stack of delivery receipts. "Hello, Cornerstone Sandwiches, this is. Where's my order?" The voice was sharp, impatient. "I ordered over an hour ago. My lunch break ends in 10 minutes. Mark's stomach dropped. He pulled up the order system on the tablet, fingers moving quickly across the screen. Order number 2847. Turkey club, extra pickles, chips, bottled water. Packed at 10:32 a.m., payment confirmed. Status, out for delivery. Ma'am, I'm showing your order left the shop 40 minutes ago. It should have reached you by now. He kept his voice calm, professional. Let me call the driver, Ann. Forget it. I'll grab something from the corner store. The line went dead. Mark stared at the phone. 40 minutes for a 12-minute delivery. That wasn't right. He texted the driver assigned to that route, Carlos, one of his most reliable guys. 5 minutes passed. No response. Mark tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Weird, but not impossible. Maybe Carlos hit traffic. Maybe his phone died. Maybe the customer's address was wrong and he was circling the block trying to find the right building. Mark went back to prepping orders. Tuesday lunch rush was building. Sandwiches lined up on the counter, each wrapped in branded paper, each labeled with a number and a name. The system worked like a machine. It had for 3 years. The second call came at 12:14 p.m. Yeah, hi, I'm still waiting on my sandwich? A younger voice this time, confused more than angry. The app says it was delivered 20 minutes ago, but nobody knocked. I've been sitting right by the door. Mark checked the system again. Order number 2851. Roast beef on rye, coleslaw, chocolate chip cookie. Mark delivered at 11:58 a.m. I'll look into this right away, sir. I'm going to refund your order and send a replacement immediately. Don't bother. I already ate something else. Another lost sale. Another missing sandwich. Mark walked to the back of the shop where his delivery team geared up between runs. 3 riders stood near their bikes, checking their phones, adjusting insulated delivery bags. Carlos wasn't among them. Anyone seen Carlos today? Mark asked. A guy named Ben looked up. He texted the group chat this morning. Said he called out sick? Mark frowned. Then who took his route? Ben shrugged. Leo picked it up. He's been running doubles all morning. Leo. Mark pictured him, early 20s, quiet, always on time, never complained. He'd only been working here 2 months, but he was fast. Maybe too fast. By 2:30 p.m., Mark had logged 5 missing orders. 5 families who paid for food they never received. 5 refunds he couldn't afford to keep issuing. 5 sandwiches that simply vanished somewhere between his shop and the customer's door. He pulled up the delivery map on his tablet, tracing the routes. Every missing order had one thing in common: Leo's name beside it. The scan log showed Leo had marked each order, delivered, right on time, sometimes even early. But the customers told a different story. Mark's jaw tightened. He didn't want to believe it. Theft was the ugly answer, the one that meant he'd hired wrong, trusted wrong. But what else made sense? A guy running double routes, moving fast, scanning orders as delivered when they clearly weren't reaching the customers? The math was simple. The sandwich cost Mark $4 to make. He sold it for $12. Losing 5 meant he was down $40 in profit today alone. If this kept happening, if this was a pattern he hadn't noticed until now. He opened the accounting software and scrolled back 2 weeks. His chest went cold. 17 complaints about missing deliveries. 17 refunds issued. All within the last 14 days. All on days Leo had worked. How had he missed this? Mark ran a hand through his hair, staring at the screen. 17 orders. $68 in lost material costs. Over $200 in lost revenue. And that was just what customers had bothered to report. How many others had simply written him off and ordered elsewhere? The shop wasn't some corporate chain with unlimited cushion for shrinkage. Cornerstone Sandwiches was his. Every ingredient, every employee paycheck, every utility bill came out of his own pocket. His supplier had already emailed him twice this month about overdue invoices. He couldn't afford this. But he also couldn't afford to accuse someone without proof. Mark thought about confronting Leo directly. Pulling him aside after his shift, asking him point-blank what was happening to those sandwiches. But if Leo was stealing, he'd just deny it. And if he wasn't, if there was some other explanation Mark couldn't see yet, he'd lose a good worker over a false accusation. No. He needed to know for sure. That night, after locking up the shop, Mark sat alone in the back office with a cup of cold coffee and a decision forming in his mind. He pulled out his phone and opened the employee schedule. Tomorrow was Wednesday, busy, but not slammed. He could afford to step away from the counter for a few hours. He opened a new text thread and typed carefully. Hey, this is Mark. I'm looking to add a temporary delivery driver for the rest of the week. Interested in picking up some extra routes? Training starts tomorrow morning. He sent it to himself, then deleted it. Then he grabbed a baseball cap from the coat rack and a plain black jacket he hadn't worn in months. He'd tell the team he hired someone new. A guy named Mike. Quiet, just trying to make some cash. Nobody would question it. And nobody would recognize the owner of the shop riding alongside them, watching every stop, every turn, every moment between the scanner beep and the customer's door. Mark didn't want to believe Leo was a thief. But tomorrow, he'd find out exactly what kind of person he really was. Mark showed up at 10 a.m. wearing clothes he'd never worn to the shop before, faded jeans, a gray hoodie, scuffed sneakers. The baseball cap sat low on his head, shadow cutting across his face. He kept his voice quiet when he introduced himself to the dispatch coordinator. Mike. Here for the delivery shift. The coordinator, a college kid named Josh, barely looked up from his clipboard. Cool. You've done this before? Yeah. Different shop across town. Perfect. We're slammed today. Josh handed him an insulated delivery bag and a scanner. You'll shadow Leo for the first few runs. He knows the routes. Just keep up and don't lose any orders. Mark nodded, slinging the bag over his shoulder. His heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. Across the staging area, Leo was loading sandwiches into his bike basket, movements quick and efficient. He didn't look like a thief. He looked like someone who took the job seriously. Leo! Josh called out. You're training the new guy today. Show him the northeast loop. Leo glanced over, gave Mark a small nod. Sure. You ready? Mark adjusted the strap on his bag. Ready. They headed out into the streets together, weaving through midday traffic. The city hummed around them, car horns, construction noise, the smell of exhaust and street vendor pretzels. Leo moved confidently, taking turns without hesitation, his bike cutting smoothly through gaps Mark would have second-guessed. The first 3 deliveries went perfectly. Leo pulled up to an office building, scanned the order, jogged inside, and returned 2 minutes later. Then a residential brownstone, same routine. Scan, deliver, return. No delays. No detours. Mark watched carefully, but there was nothing unusual. Nothing that explained the missing sandwiches. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the losses were a glitch in the system, or customers lying to get free food. Maybe. You good on water? Leo asked, glancing back as they paused at a red light. Mark blinked. Yeah. I'm fine. It's hot today. Stay hydrated. Leo's tone was casual, almost friendly. He didn't seem nervous. Didn't seem like someone hiding anything. They continued along the route. 4th delivery, 5th, 6th. Everything clean. Then, on the 7th stop, something shifted. Mark noticed it in the way Leo checked his phone after scanning the order. A quick glance, like he was confirming something. Then, Instead of taking the direct route back toward the shop for the next pickup, Leo turned left down a side street. Mark followed, keeping a few bike lengths behind. The street was quieter. Older buildings, fewer pedestrians. Leo's pace didn't change. He wasn't speeding up or looking over his shoulder. He rode like this was part of the plan. Mark's pulse quickened. This wasn't the route back. This wasn't the route to anything. They passed the corner store, a shuttered laundromat, a row of parked cars with sun-faded paint. Leo kept going, calm and focused, until he reached a narrow cross street and turned again. Mark slowed, staying far enough back to avoid suspicion. His mind raced. Was this it? Was Leo meeting someone? Selling the sandwiches? Stashing them somewhere? But then Leo stopped at an apartment building, nothing fancy, just a standard residential address, and pulled a sandwich from his bag. He scanned it, walked up the steps, and knocked. An older woman answered. She smiled, said something Mark couldn't hear, and accepted the sandwich. Leo handed her a napkin, waited until she closed the door, then returned to his bike. Mark exhaled slowly. Just another delivery. Maybe Leo knew a shortcut. Maybe the app had rerouted him. But the doubt lingered. They finished the route by 12:30 p.m. and headed back to the shop for the next batch of orders. Leo didn't say much, just nodded when Mark thanked him for the help. "You're fast," Mark said carefully, testing. "How long you been doing this?" "Couple months." Leo locked his bike near the staging area. "It's good work. Pays on time." Mark wanted to ask more, wanted to dig, but he held back. Pushing too hard would blow his cover. The afternoon shift started. More orders, more routes. Mark rode solo this time, taking the southern district while Leo handled the northwest. Everything seemed normal. Until 3:45 p.m., when Mark circled back early and saw Leo leaving the shop with his delivery bag, fuller than it should have been for the 2 orders listed on his scanner. Mark's stomach tightened. He waited 30 seconds, then followed. Leo didn't take the main road. He cut through a parking lot, then down an access alley most people didn't even know existed. Mark stayed far behind, pulse hammering in his ears. This time, Leo wasn't making a standard delivery. This time, he was going somewhere off the map. Mark kept his distance, weaving between parked delivery trucks and dumpsters. His bike tires barely made a sound against the cracked pavement. Ahead, Leo's figure grew smaller as he turned deeper into the network of back alleys that cut between the old apartment complexes on the east side. This wasn't the delivery zone. Mark knew every address in his coverage area, and none of them were back here. The alley narrowed. Brick walls rose on both sides, streaked with years of grime and faded graffiti. Fire escapes zigzagged overhead, laundry hanging limp in the still air. The sounds of the main street faded behind him. No more car horns, no more voices. Just the distant hum of an air conditioning unit and the rhythmic click of his bike chain. Leo stopped. Mark froze, 1 foot on the ground, half hidden behind a rusted dumpster. His breath came shallow and quick. From here, he could see Leo clearly, standing beside his bike, scanning the alley in both directions. Not nervous. Just careful. Then Leo reached into his delivery bag. Mark's hands tightened on the handlebars. This was it. The moment he'd know for sure. But Leo didn't pull out cash. He didn't meet another person for a handoff. Instead, he pulled out sandwiches. 3 of them, still wrapped in Cornerstone's branded paper. And then the doors opened. They emerged quietly, first one, then another, then several more. People who'd been waiting in the shadows of recessed doorways and beneath the fire escapes. A woman in a faded coat too heavy for the weather. A man with a limp, leaning on a wooden cane. 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10, holding hands. Mark's chest constricted. Leo didn't say much. He just handed out the sandwiches, one by one, making sure the children ate first. The younger kid tore into the wrapper immediately, eyes wide. The older one whispered something, probably, "Thank you," but Mark couldn't hear from this distance. The woman in the coat took hers with both hands, nodding slowly. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from a long day. The kind that came from a long life. Leo checked his bag again, pulling out a bottled water, then another. He distributed them carefully, making sure everyone got something. Mark felt his throat tighten. This wasn't theft. Not the kind he'd imagined. More faces appeared. An elderly man with a gray beard, a younger woman holding a toddler on her hip, a teenager in a ripped jacket who looked like he hadn't slept in days. None of them rushed. None of them fought over the food. They just waited their turn, quiet and grateful. Leo spoke to each of them briefly. Mark couldn't make out the words, but the tone was gentle. He crouched down to eye level with the kids, asked them something that made the younger one nod. He handed the teenager an extra sandwich and squeezed his shoulder. Mark watched, frozen, as the scene unfolded. His anger had evaporated, replaced by something heavier. Something he didn't have a name for. These weren't customers who'd paid and never received their orders. These were people who couldn't pay at all. The group dispersed slowly, disappearing back into doorways and around corners. Within minutes, the alley was empty again except for Leo, standing beside his bike, folding the empty delivery bag. Mark's mind raced. The missing orders. The refunds. The complaints. Leo had been taking sandwiches, but not for himself. Not to sell. Not for profit. He'd been feeding people who were starving. Mark's hands trembled on the handlebars. He wanted to step forward, to confront Leo right now, to demand answers. But his legs wouldn't move. His voice wouldn't come. Because what would he even say? You're stealing from me to feed homeless families? You're costing me money I don't have to give food to people who need it more than I need profit. Every argument he'd rehearsed in his head last night suddenly felt hollow. Leo climbed back onto his bike, checked his phone, and started pedaling toward the main street. He didn't look back. Didn't seem guilty or anxious. He just rode away like he'd completed another routine delivery. Mark waited until Leo was out of sight, then let out a long, shaky breath. He should have felt relieved. He'd found the truth. No organized theft ring. No employee selling food on the side. Just one guy with a conscience he couldn't ignore. But relief wasn't what Mark felt. Instead, he felt the weight of a choice he wasn't ready to make. Because now he knew where the sandwiches were going, and he knew he couldn't let it continue. But he also knew he couldn't unsee the faces of those kids tearing into the food like they hadn't eaten in days. Mark turned his bike around and headed back toward the shop, his mind spinning. Tomorrow, he'd have to decide what kind of person he was. Mark didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table until 2 a.m., staring at nothing, replaying the scene in the alley over and over. The kids. The woman in the too heavy coat. The teenager with the hollow eyes. And Leo, handing out sandwiches like it was the most natural thing in the world. By morning, Mark knew what he had to do. He arrived at the shop early, before the first delivery shift started. The streets were still quiet, the sun barely climbing over the rooftops. He unlocked the back door and went straight to the office, pulling up the schedule on his tablet. Leo's shift ended at 8 p.m. tonight. Mark would wait. The day dragged. Every hour felt like 3. Mark went through the motions, prepping orders, managing the counter, restocking supplies, but his mind was somewhere else. He caught himself staring at the delivery tracker, watching Leo's name move across the map, wondering how many stops were real and how many were detours into alleys he'd never see. By 7:45 p.m., the shop had quieted down. The last few customers trickled out. The kitchen staff started cleaning up. Mark wiped down the counter, eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds. At 8:03 p.m., Leo walked in. He looked tired but not drained. He returned his scanner and delivery bag to the dispatch rack, signed out on the tablet, and grabbed his jacket from the hook near the back door. "Leo," Mark called out, keeping his voice level. "You got a minute?" Leo turned, surprised. "Yeah, sure. What's up? Let's talk upstairs." Leo's expression shifted, just slightly. A flicker of uncertainty. But he nodded and followed Mark up the narrow stairwell to the rooftop access, a cramped space the staff used for smoke breaks. The door closed behind them. The city sprawled out in every direction, lights beginning to glow as dusk settled in. Mark leaned against the railing, arms crossed. Leo stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. Waiting. "I know what you've been doing," Mark said quietly. Leo didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just exhaled slowly and nodded. Okay. That was it. No denial. No excuse. Just acceptance. Mark's jaw tightened. "You've been taking sandwiches off the routes. Marking them delivered when they never reached the customers. I've had to refund dozens of orders because of you." "I know." "You know?" Mark's voice rose despite himself. "You know you're stealing from me?" "Yeah." Leo's voice stayed calm, but there was something underneath it, something resigned. "I know." Mark stared at him, waiting for more. When Leo didn't continue, Mark pushed. "That's it? That's all you've got to say?" Leo met his eyes. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? I am. That I'll stop? I won't." The honesty hit Mark like a slap. He shook his head, incredulous. "You realize I could fire you right now? Call the cops. Press charges." "I know." Leo's hands came out of his pockets. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking out over the rooftops. "I've been expecting it." "Then why?" Mark's frustration boiled over. "Why keep doing it if you knew you'd get caught?" Leo was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "I grew up in a shelter," he said. "Me and my mom. We bounced between 3 different places before I turned 12. There were nights we didn't eat. Nights she'd give me her portion and tell me she wasn't hungry, even though I knew she was." Mark said nothing. "I remember what it felt like," Leo continued. "That kind of hunger. The kind that makes you feel invisible. Like the world's moving around you and you're just stuck, waiting for someone to notice you're there." He turned back to Mark. "I see those people in the alleys, and I see my mom. I see myself. And I can't just ride past them. I can't scan an order, take a picture of some guy's front door, and pretend I don't know there's a kid 2 blocks over who hasn't eaten today." Mark's throat felt tight. "So you steal from me to feed them?" "I take a few sandwiches," Leo corrected quietly. "Never entire orders. Just the extras when we're overstocked. Just enough so the numbers don't spike all at once." The numbers did spike. Mark shot back. "I'm losing money I don't have, Leo. My supplier's threatening to cut me off. I'm barely keeping this place alive." Leo's face fell. For the first time, guilt flickered across his features. "I didn't know it was that bad." "Well, now you do." Silence stretched between them. The city hummed below, distant sirens, car engines, someone shouting in another language. Finally, Leo nodded. "I'll pack my stuff." "Wait." The word came out before Mark could stop it. Leo paused, hand on the door. Mark didn't know what he was going to say. Didn't know if he was about to make the smartest decision of his life or the stupidest. But he knew he couldn't let Leo walk away without understanding the full picture. "Just give me a couple days," Mark said quietly. "Don't do anything yet." Leo frowned. "Why?" "Because I need to figure this out." Mark didn't go home that night. He stayed in the office long after Leo left, surrounded by spreadsheets and invoices that told a story he didn't want to read. The numbers didn't lie. He pulled up 3 months of financial records, cross-referencing delivery complaints with inventory costs. His coffee went cold. The office got darker. Outside, the city shifted from evening rush to late-night quiet. The pattern was there, clear as daylight once he knew what to look for. Missing sandwiches had started small, 2 or 3 a week back in October when Leo first started. Mark had written those off as system errors, customer mistakes, the usual friction of running a business. But by November, it had crept up to 5 or 6 a week. Now, in early December, some days saw 8 or 9 sandwiches disappear. Leo had been careful. Strategic. Never enough to trigger alarm bells. Never entire orders that would make customers call the police instead of just requesting refunds. But careful didn't mean free. Mark grabbed a calculator and started tallying. Material costs per sandwich, $420. Labor, packaging, delivery, another $250. Total cost per missing sandwich, $670. Over 3 months, at roughly 6 sandwiches per week. His stomach dropped. $312 in direct losses. That didn't count the refunds he'd issued to keep customers happy. Didn't count the reputation damage from negative reviews. Didn't count the customers who'd simply stopped ordering after their food never showed up. Mark pushed back from the desk, running both hands through his hair. $300 might not sound like much to a chain restaurant with venture capital backing. But Cornerstone Sandwiches wasn't a chain. It was him. Every morning at 5 a.m., prepping bread. Every night balancing books that never quite balanced. Every month praying the profit margin would cover rent, utilities, payroll, and suppliers. He pulled up his bank account on the computer. Current balance, $2,847. Outstanding invoices, $3,200. His bread supplier had already sent 2 warnings. The meat distributor wanted payment up front for the next order. And rent was due in 12 days. Mark closed his eyes. He'd started Cornerstone 4 years ago with money borrowed from his brother, and a dream that felt foolish now. He'd survived a pandemic that killed half the restaurants on his street. He'd survived supply chain disasters, staffing shortages, a burst pipe that flooded the kitchen. But he'd survived by being smart. By watching every dollar. By making hard choices when he had to. And now he had to make another one. Fire Leo. Stop the bleeding. Save the business. It was simple math. So why did it feel impossible? Mark went home at midnight. He heated up leftover pasta he barely tasted, took a shower that didn't relax him, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. The little girl with the sandwich, tearing into it like she'd been waiting all day. The woman in the heavy coat, holding the food with both hands like it was precious. The teenager who looked like he'd given up on everything except his next meal. Mark had grown up comfortable. Not rich, but stable. Dinner was always on the table. His mom worked 2 jobs to make sure of it, but the food was there. He'd never known what it felt like to be truly hungry. Never had to choose between eating and keeping the lights on. But he knew what it felt like to struggle. To pour everything into something and watch it teeter on the edge of collapse. Cornerstone was his life. If it failed, he didn't have a backup plan. No savings. No fallback career. Just debt and a failed dream. He rolled over, grabbing his phone from the nightstand. 2:17 a.m., and he opened his email and scrolled through supplier invoices, past due notices, polite but firm reminders that payment was expected. Then he opened his photos. There, buried in a folder from 3 years ago, was a picture from Cornerstone's opening day. Mark stood in front of the shop, grinning like an idiot, holding a sandwich up to the camera. His brother had taken the photo, teasing him about finally doing something with his life besides complaining about his corporate job. That version of Mark had believed in something. Had thought feeding people mattered. Had imagined building something that served the community, not just his bank account. When had that changed? Mark set the phone down and stared at the ceiling again. If he fired Leo, the losses would stop. The business would stabilize. He'd survive another month, maybe 2. Keep the doors open. Keep the dream alive. But those people in the alley wouldn't stop being hungry. They'd just go back to being invisible. Morning came too quickly. Mark dragged himself to the shop at 6 a.m., exhausted and no closer to an answer. He prepped the kitchen on autopilot, slicing tomatoes, portioning meats, setting up the line. At 9:30 a.m., Leo arrived for his shift. Their eyes met across the staging area. Leo nodded once, cautious. Mark nodded back. Neither of them said anything. Leo grabbed his scanner and delivery bag, loaded up the morning orders, and headed out. Mark watched him go, jaw tight. He had 2 days to decide. 2 days to choose between saving his business and saving his conscience. Mark noticed it on the second day. He was restocking the prep station when Ben came back from his route 20 minutes late. Not unusual. Traffic happened, buildings were hard to find, customers took forever to answer their doors. Mark barely looked up. But then, an hour later, a customer called. "Yeah, hi. My sandwich never showed up. Your app says it was delivered, but I've been home all afternoon." Mark's hand froze on the tablet. "Let me check that for you. Order number 3104. Delivered by Ben." Scanned at 1:47 p.m., and his chest tightened. "I'm so sorry about that. I'll send a replacement right away and refund your order." He hung up and stared at the screen. Ben had been with him for 8 months. Reliable. Never a single complaint. Never a missing order. Until today. Mark told himself it was a fluke. A genuine mistake. Maybe Ben had scanned the wrong order, delivered to the wrong address. It happened. But the doubt was there now, a splinter under his skin. By the 4th day, the splinter had become a wound. 3 more orders went missing. 2 from Ben's route. 1 from a newer rider named Sophia, a college student who worked weekends for extra cash. Mark pulled up the delivery map and traced their routes with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Ben's detour took him through the industrial district near the rail yards, an area with no active delivery addresses. Sophia's gap in tracking lasted 11 minutes in a neighborhood Mark recognized, low-income housing, east of the river. They were copying Leo. Mark sat in the office, head in his hands, trying to process what was happening. Leo must have told them. Or maybe they'd noticed his routes, followed him, seen what he was doing. Maybe they'd asked him directly. Maybe he'd recruited them. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that the problem was spreading. What had been one person's quiet act of conscience was becoming a movement. And it was going to destroy him. That evening, Mark stayed late again, recalculating the damage. Week 1 after discovering Leo, 6 missing sandwiches. Week 2, 13. Now, 4 days into week 3, 11 sandwiches already gone. At this rate, he'd lose 40 sandwiches this week alone. Nearly $300 in costs. $600 in lost revenue. The math was brutal and getting worse. Mark opened his email. A new message from his bread supplier sat at the top of his inbox, the subject line in all caps, "Final notice payment required." He didn't open it. He already knew what it said. Instead, he pulled up his bank account. Balance, $1,983. Rent due in 8 days, $2,400. He'd have to choose. Pay rent or pay suppliers. Keep the location or keep the ingredients. Either way, he'd be cannibalizing the business to survive another week. Mark closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't sustainable. It had never been sustainable, but he'd been willing to tolerate Leo's thefts when it was just Leo. One person with a painful past and a guilty conscience. That was manageable. Barely. But 3 people? Maybe more if this kept spreading? He couldn't absorb that. No business could. The next morning, Mark arrived early and waited near the dispatch area. He watched as the riders came in for their shifts, Leo first, then Ben, then Sophia. They didn't interact any differently than usual. No secretive glances. No huddled conversations. They just prepped their bikes, loaded their bags, and headed out. But Mark saw it now. The way Ben checked his phone before leaving, the same way Leo did. The way Sophia took an extra moment organizing her delivery bag, making sure she had room. Room for what the scanner wouldn't track. Mark's jaw clenched. He wanted to confront them. Line them up right here and demand answers. But what would that accomplish? They'd deny it, or worse, they'd quit, and he'd be short-staffed going into the weekend rush. He needed a plan. A real one. Not firing Leo and hoping the problem went away. not pretending he didn't see what was happening. He needed to fix this. Completely. Before it consumed everything he'd built. At 2 p.m., Mark locked himself in the office and opened his laptop. He started researching. Food banks. Shelters. Community programs. Donation systems. Anything that might offer a solution that didn't involve choosing between his business and his humanity. Most programs required food safety certifications he didn't have. Others only accepted bulk donations, not individual meals. Some had wait lists months long. He kept digging. An hour later, he found something. A community center 6 blocks away that ran a daily meal service. They accepted prepared food donations from local restaurants, as long as the food met basic safety standards and was delivered within 2 hours of preparation. Mark stared at the website. This could work. Maybe. But it would require buy-in. From his staff. From his customers. From everyone. And it would require something even harder, admitting the truth. Mark closed the laptop and looked out the office window at the delivery riders coming and going below. He couldn't let this continue in the shadows. That was clear now. But bringing it into the light meant risking everything, his reputation, his employees, his business. He had one chance to get this right. And he was running out of time. Mark called the staff meeting for Sunday morning, before the shop opened. He'd sent the text Saturday night, mandatory meeting tomorrow 9 a.m. Everyone needs to be there. No explanation. No context. Just the requirement. When he arrived at 8:45 a.m., his stomach was in knots. He'd rehearsed what he'd say a dozen times, but every version felt wrong. Too accusatory. Too soft. Too much like a speech and not enough like the truth. By 9, they were all there. Leo, Ben, Sophia, and the other 4 riders. Josh from dispatch. Maria and Tim from the kitchen. 12 people sitting on stools and counters, looking confused and slightly worried. Mandatory meetings usually meant bad news. Mark stood near the register, hands in his pockets, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "Thanks for coming," he started. "I know Sunday mornings are rough. I'll keep this as brief as I can." He paused, looking at their faces. Leo sat in the back, expression unreadable. Ben stared at his phone. Sophia picked at her thumbnail. "I'm going to be direct," Mark continued. "Over the past few weeks, we've had a significant number of missing deliveries. Customers paying for food that never reaches them. Orders marked delivered that never arrived." The room tensed. A few riders exchanged glances. "I know why it's happening," Mark said. "And I know who's responsible." Leo's eyes flicked up, meeting his. No fear. Just quiet resignation. "Before anyone panics," Mark raised a hand. "Nobody's getting fired. Not today." Confusion rippled through the group. "I followed one of you," Mark admitted. "Saw where the sandwiches were going. Saw who was eating them." He looked directly at Leo. "I know what you've been doing. And I know others have started doing the same thing." Ben's face went pale. Sophia stopped picking at her nail. "You're feeding people who can't afford food," Mark said simply. "People living in alleys, under bridges, in shelters. People who are hungry." The silence was deafening. "And I get it," Mark continued, his voice softer now. "I really do. You see someone who needs help, and you help them. That's not a character flaw. That's being human." Leo's expression shifted, uncertain where this was going. "But here's the problem," Mark said. "This business is barely surviving. I'm not some corporate chain with endless resources. Every sandwich that goes missing is money I don't have. Money I need to pay rent, pay suppliers, pay you." He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, turning the screen toward them. "This is my account balance. $1,983. Rent is due in 6 days. It's $2,400. I'm short. And if I don't figure something out, we're closing. All of us." The weight of that hung in the air. "So I have a choice," Mark said. I can fire everyone involved and stop the bleeding. Save the business, maybe, for another month or two. Or, he paused. Or we figure out how to do this right. Sophia frowned. Do what right? Feed people, Mark said. The people who need it. But in a way that doesn't destroy us. He walked to the counter and pulled out a folder he'd prepared the night before. I've been researching. There's a community center 6 blocks from here that runs a daily meal service. They accept prepared food donations. We could partner with them, make extra sandwiches specifically for donation and deliver them legally, with proper documentation. Ben leaned forward. You want us to just give away food? Not exactly. Mark opened the folder, showing them printouts of his plan. I want to build it into the business model. What if customers could add a donation sandwich to their order? Pay an extra $5, and we make an additional sandwich that goes directly to the shelter. No profit for us, just covering costs. The customer feels good. The hungry person gets fed. And we're not hemorrhaging money we don't have. Maria, one of the kitchen staff, spoke up. You think people will actually do that? I don't know, Mark admitted. Maybe. Maybe not. But we can try. He looked at Leo. You wanted to help people. This is how we do it without killing the business. We make it transparent. We make it part of who we are. Leo stood slowly. And if it doesn't work? If customers don't donate enough? Mark met his eyes. Then we tried. And we did it the right way. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Leo nodded. I'm in. Ben exhaled. Yeah. Me too. Sophia raised her hand slightly. Same. One by one, the others agreed. Mark felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not yet. But hope. Fragile and uncertain, but real. Okay, he said. Then let's build something better. By Monday afternoon, the new system was live. Mark had updated the app over the weekend, adding a simple button, add a meal for someone in need $5. And he'd reached out to the community center. They were thrilled. Grateful. Ready to coordinate. Now, they just had to see if anyone would actually donate. Mark watched the orders come in, heart pounding with every notification. The first order of the day, 1 turkey club. No donation. The second, 2 roast beef sandwiches. No donation. Third order, veggie wrap, chips, drink. And a donation. Mark's breath caught. 1 donation. $5. 1 sandwich that would reach someone who needed it. It wasn't much. But it was a start. 3 weeks later, Mark stood at the counter watching the lunch rush, and for the first time in months, he wasn't counting losses. He was counting something else. The tablet on the counter showed the day's orders scrolling past, each one tagged with a name, an address, a list of items. And scattered among them, like small lights in the dark, were the donation add-ons. Turkey Club plus donation. BLT, chips, cookie plus donation. Veggie wrap plus donation. 18 donations by noon. 18 sandwiches that would go to the community center that afternoon, delivered by Leo on a route that was finally, officially, on the books. Mark had been terrified the first week. Terrified that customers would ignore the button, that the whole plan would collapse, that he made a naive mistake thinking people would care. But they did care. Not everyone. Most orders still came through without donations. But enough people clicked that button, enough people added $5 to their total, that it made a difference. The first week brought 43 donations. Enough to feed 43 people who otherwise wouldn't have eaten. The second week, 61. Last week, 82. And this week was tracking even higher. Mark had done the math obsessively, checking and rechecking to make sure the system was sustainable. The $5 donation covered the material cost of the sandwich plus a small buffer for delivery. It wasn't generating profit, but it wasn't bleeding him dry either. And something unexpected had happened. Regular orders had increased too. Mark noticed it in the reviews first. 4 stars became 5 stars. Comments that used to say, "Good sandwich," now said things like, "Great food and I love that I can help feed someone in need." And, "Finally a business that cares about the community." New customers started showing up, specifically because they'd heard about the donation program. A woman came in last Tuesday and ordered lunch for her office, adding 10 donation sandwiches. "I saw your story on the neighborhood Facebook group," she'd said. "This is exactly what we need more of." The story had spread quietly through the community, not because Mark advertised it, but because customers told each other. Because Leo delivered meals to the community center, and people there told their friends. Because it felt good to be part of something that mattered. Mark's supplier had called last week, asking if everything was okay. "Your orders have gone up," he'd said, puzzled. "Didn't expect that this time of year." Mark had paid his rent on time, paid his suppliers, paid his staff, and still had money left over. On Thursday afternoon, Mark drove to the community center for the first time. He'd coordinated everything remotely until now: emails, phone calls, logistics. But he wanted to see it. Needed to see it. The center was housed in an old church building, the paint peeling but the windows bright. Inside, folding tables were set up in neat rows, and volunteers moved between them, handing out meals. Leo was already there, unloading insulated bags from his bike. He looked up when Mark walked in, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you here," Leo said. "Wanted to check it out." Mark looked around. "See where everything's going." "Come on," Leo gestured toward the serving area. "I'll show you." They walked through the main hall. Families sat at the tables, parents with kids, elderly people eating alone, a few teenagers huddled together. The sandwiches were laid out on trays, each one still wrapped in Cornerstone's paper. Mark recognized some of the faces. The woman in the heavy coat, she sat near the window, eating slowly, methodically. The 2 kids he'd seen in the alley were there too, sitting with what looked like their mother. The younger one had a sandwich in each hand, alternating bites. A volunteer approached, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Director Sarah Chin. "You must be Mark," she said, extending her hand. "I've been hoping to meet you." Mark shook her hand. "Just wanted to see the operation. It's been incredible," Sarah said. "Before you started, we could only guarantee 1 meal a day, and even that was inconsistent. Now, with your donations, we're serving lunch 6 days a week. You've fed over 200 people in 3 weeks. 200 people. Mark felt the number settle in his chest. "Leo tells me this almost didn't happen," Sarah continued. "That you almost shut it down." Mark glanced at Leo, who shrugged slightly. "I almost did," Mark admitted. "I was scared. Thought it would destroy my business. And now?" Mark looked around the room again. At the families eating. At the volunteers serving. At the sandwiches with his shop's logo feeding people who'd been invisible to him 3 weeks ago. "Now I think it saved it," he said quietly. That evening, Mark sat in his office doing the weekly accounting. The numbers were still tight, they always would be. But they balanced. More importantly, they meant something. He opened the tablet and looked at tomorrow's orders. Already 15 donations logged for the morning rush. 15 people who would eat because someone else decided $5 was worth it. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The sandwiches had never been lost. They'd just been waiting for permission to reach the right hands. And now, finally, they were feeding everyone.